maybe next time.
I want to get right into what I think is one of the central questions about your campaign and the critique from traditional establishment Democrats, Biden Democrats, is that your campaign in any other year might be interesting, might be a breath of fresh air, might be amusing, quixotic maybe, but in this year, with Donald Trump seeming to be the inevitable Republican nominee, that your campaign is dangerous.
Yeah. Well,
How do you address that?
I have to say, I think the truth is just the opposite. The dangerous campaign right now is the campaign of an incumbent who is weak, and in my estimation, and many of those around the country, including within the Beltway, unelectable, reinforced by the data. And the data says that he has the lowest approval ratings in modern presidential history. I believe about 3 points below where Donald Trump was at the same point in his presidency, 9 points below where Barack Obama was. He is behind in every battleground state poll I have seen. 8 points in Georgia, I think about the same number in Michigan. You cannot win re-election. I was at a Trump rally last night, actually walking the line of people waiting outside in the cold to go to it. That energy, the way he brings people out, the number of people there last night who had never been to a Trump event before was astounding and should be frightening. So I think actually the delusion is not my campaign, it's actually the Democratic National Committee, led by Joe Biden, that is propagating a very dangerous delusion with Democrats around this country. And in a country founded on the premise of competition makes things better, we are proceeding with a dangerous coordination. That's why somebody had to stand up.
Why should that person be you? There's a lot of other candidates waiting in the wings who
Sure.
haven't gone as far as you as getting on the ballot, but there are governors and a deep bench of Democratic candidates who could be the heir apparent to Joe Biden. Why should you be that heir
And I'm
apparent?
glad you mentioned that, Gregory, because my first step was to call for the president to pass the torch. This is a year ago, July of 2022. He refused. Then I actually started calling those names that you know better than mine. Some of those governors you are probably thinking right now. Not only would they refuse to enter the race, they didn't want to take my calls because they are all protecting their own interests to run in 2028. My message to them would have been, there may not be a 2028 because I don't think Donald Trump will do anything but stick around, destroy democracy, act like President Xi and Vladimir Putin in extending terms beyond what the Constitution permits. And I believe it is that lack of courage in Congress amongst governors to play this really dangerous game of standing in line when the country needs you to stand up and participate. That's the difference between democracy and dictatorships. So I did call on those. I've got the receipts to prove it, and my invitation remains to them. Jump in, the water's warm, a competition is what this country needs. 70% of Americans want neither of these candidates, and that's the truth.
Would you want Vice President Kamala Harris to jump in then?
Sure.
Instead
Vice
of-
President Harris, I don't want it instead
instead of
of. Oh, I think
Instead of Biden.
I think she should. I think Governor Newsom. I think Governor Whitmer. I think Governor Pritzker. I think anybody. This is America, for goodness sakes, everybody. Why are we even having a conversation about who should or shouldn't? The whole point is to do what the GOP is doing right now, against essentially a man who has an iron grip on the Republican Party. And yet they have a very energetic competition. Now, most have fallen by the wayside, but at least they did it. Our party is acting in an antithetical manner, and my concern is that's the problem. I think the vice president, I think those governors, I think others capable candidates. The more people compete, the more likely we are to choose a candidate, in my estimation, who can beat Donald Trump, based on the data.
Congressman, you
Yes.
have said that you, hi, sorry.
I'm sorry, I can't see you. Oh, is it Wendy?
Yes, Wendy, I'm with Bloomberg. You have argued that you would not be a spoiler in the Democratic race because you would pull votes from Donald Trump. What is your explanation for how you would pull votes from Trump faithful voters? Why would they choose you, a Democratic congressman?
Well, I'll tell you, because the data says again, many of those people in line last night, they voted for Barack Obama. Many of them were supporters of Bernie Sanders. The Democratic Party has comprehensively abandoned huge swaths of this country, especially middle America, the heartland, if you will, rural America. We're not showing up. We're not proposing. We're not listening. If anything, we are condemning. You know, I think when former candidate Hillary Clinton called them deplorables, that still hurts half of this country. As someone who came up in the business world, I never succeeded in business by condemning 50% of my customer universe. And the fact that politicians practice this is an example of why we are in such trouble right now. So my contention is very simple. like President Trump, former President Trump, I'm a business person. Unlike President Trump, I've never declared bankruptcy, never had our family foundation shut down because of unethical behavior, never been indicted in federal court for these atrocities that he's being charged with. And a lot of Americans want someone who has business experience to help operate an enterprise that has not been well managed, I think, for decades. Furthermore, I'm the second most bipartisan member of the United States Congress. I take great pride in that. Not just Congress, by the way, all the governors, Common Ground Committee. You can look that up. I flipped a district that had been Republican for 60 years. When I ran in 2018, flipped a district that a Democrat had not won since 1958, beat an incumbent, a Republican, who had won by 14 points. In 2016, I beat him by 12. I know how to use invitation instead of confrontation. The way to defeat Donald Trump is not to eviscerate him as a human being. It is to extend invitations to the people who are following him because they believe he's the only one listening. The only one listening. Many of those supporting him right now were former Democrats that gave up on this party because of people like the current president who have been doing this for 50 years and, in my estimation, alienating the very people that we should be inviting.
You said, sorry.
Go ahead.
Michael?
Yeah. When I spoke with you briefly on Saturday.
Yeah.
You had left the door open to possibly running on a no labels ticket if the data allowed.
Yeah.
There's a headline in Politico today from Jeff Weaver saying you're ruling that out now and you're not running for no labels. So can you clarify where your position is on
Yeah,
that?
I'm glad you qualified it with if the data suggested that would work. The data suggests it won't work, which is why I am a proud Democrat. I intend to run as a Democrat and secure the nomination as a Democrat, and I wish others would be running in the Democratic primary. My message about a third party was that might be the last possibility to prevent a Trump presidency if Joe Biden is at the top of the ticket. And just to let Democrats know to keep their eyes, ears, and hearts and minds open to that possibility. My contention is the only way that that could work is if a Ramaswamy or a DeSantis was at the top of a third-party ticket that would draw votes from President Trump. I surely would not do so. I don't think any moderate Democrat like Joe Manchin, I don't think a moderate Republican like Larry Hogan could do that either, or John Huntsman. That's my point. I just don't think people should turn their attention away from the possibility of a third-party ticket that could actually help Democrats defeat the dictator.
So you're not ruling out the possibility of you being on a no labels ticket if you don't win the nomination, and it's the best way to defeat Donald Trump?
As I said earlier, it's all data-based. I cannot imagine that the data would suggest that that would be a path that would be successful. So I cannot imagine doing so, and I should have made that more clear. I'm a Democrat. I intend to remain a Democrat and run in this primary. But since you asked the question, Michael, part of my message was that the Democratic National Committee is actually working against competition. They are working against the objective that, in my estimation, we should be in pursuit of, which is to defeat Donald Trump. This notion that Joe Biden is the only one who could do it is the most absurd and dangerous delusion I've ever heard. I'm trying to call attention to that fact. That's the only reason why No Labels is even contemplating some type of initiative if there's a Trump-Biden rematch. I do know enough about them that they do not want Donald Trump to become the next president. That is their overarching objective. The Democratic National Committee, I think, has been quite active to deplatform them and paint them as a danger. I am saying that they could be the last frontier to prevent it if they found a candidate who could draw votes from President Trump. That would not be me.
So when Wednesday morning gets here, what's your next move?
I'm going to go right to South Carolina, the next state in the Democratic primary. I like running to, the next state, but also where Joe Biden is very strong, a place where he should get 95% of the vote. I like running to the fire, if you will, and that's where I will head next, and can't wait.
Congressman,
Oh,
sorry,
Finn? Okay.
please. Congressman, good to see you again, sir, and
Nice to see you, too.
thanks again to Peggy and Bloomberg for hosting us. I was there when you announced your candidacy, beautiful, iconic, Virginia countryside. It seemed there was a lot of hope emanating from you. Hope that your candidacy would catch on, you would be this legitimate opposition to a sitting president. Why hasn't your candidacy caught on? Why hasn't there been more support from the Democratic base? Why hasn't? We have seen the polling that shows that there is concern amongst Democrats about a rematch in 2020. Can you explain, sir, why that hasn't
Yeah, sure,
happened?
Finn. In fact, well, you all know from your own experiences, life experiences, that no journey is linear. Of course, I've started this with optimism, but more than that, with principle. That I had to call attention to what I consider a delusion, and a dangerous one at that. When we started, we had no name recognition, 0% in the polls, very little resources, human and otherwise. What we've achieved in just 10 weeks will be historic in nature, and I think that will prove out tomorrow night in the numbers. I mean it. And I think you will see an overperformance that is unanticipated, and an underperformance by the incumbent president of the United States that will be shocking. That's my expectation. If any of you have been to my events in just the last 4 days or so, you will have seen an extraordinary, almost beyond description, elevation in energy, attendance, optimism, youth coming out. I think we finally hit that moment where this is actually starting to catch on. And I think it'll demonstrate itself in the numbers. And after 10 weeks, if you told me we'd get as far as we have, I would have said, you're probably kidding me. So I'm pleased, actually, and I think it'll prove out tomorrow night.
So what share of undeclared voters are you anticipating you could get when we keep hearing that actually it's going to be all the action on the Republican side for these undeclared?
Well, there's no question that I think Ambassador Haley will pick up a number of independents who are trying to prevent a Trump presidency. I think the writing's on the wall. I think this could be her last competition in that, either that or South Carolina, but neither here nor there. I think we will attract a number of those independents as they recognize.
What's a number?
I don't have a number. I don't know I'm not in the business of quantifying what we expect of independent voters. I'm making my case. As you might know, there's a super PAC here that is supporting a write-in effort for Joe Biden. There's another super PAC set up to encourage independents to vote for Nikki Haley, which, by the way, if you're a Democrat and you are actually encouraging independents to vote Nikki Haley and it succeeded, Joe Biden gets crushed by her in a national election. I know every one of you at the table know that. It is an example of how unbelievably non-strategic people in some of the most important and powerful positions of the world are. And I think it is because they have a lack of private sector, for-profit, institutional experience, and they look at everything from a lens that puts blinders on. And I think it is dangerous and foolish, and I'm excited about what the numbers might look like tomorrow night. And no matter where they are, they will surely be better than I think most people anticipated.
Your campaign has come under some scrutiny in the past couple days about the removal of a DEI section from your website after Bill Ackman announced that he would endorse you and donate to a super PAC supporting your candidacy. Do you agree with Ackman, who's been very critical of DEI, and when was the last time you talked with him? What did you guys talk about?
Well, first of all, let me clarify what happened here. On my congressional website, it has long said equity and civil rights. I wasn't even aware, I didn't realize that the same heading with the same section in my campaign website had diversity, equity, and inclusion. That was my decision to make it more similar to what I already had up, and it now reads equity and restorative justice, which is really what that section is about. What I did not realize is those words together, diversity, in which I deeply believe, equity, in which I deeply believe, and inclusion, in which I deeply believe, is yet another example of words put together that are now slogans that are being litigated and dividing the country. That's not the game I play. While others litigate slogans, I'll come up with solutions. If you've heard my solutions to the very problem, the long tail of slavery, the wealth and income disparities between black Americans and white Americans, if someone would pay attention to that and not the slogans, you might actually see a candidate who's actually trying to solve the problem. That's what that was about. Nobody buys me, nobody tells me what to do, and that is not an example of someone doing that, let me tell you.
But am I hearing you correctly that you're saying that you are critical of sort of DEI branded programs?
No, I think there's an important need in this country to A, acknowledge what slavery did to the black community in this country, B, what policies since then have done to prevent the black community from reaching parity with just about every other group in America. That's the only way in a country in which all are created equal you could explain white families having 6 times more wealth than black families. So I will not ever say that these are not important missions. Am I learning about some of the programs in certain companies and certain campuses that I believe are having byproducts that are perhaps dangerous for other communities? Yes. But that does not take anything away from the need to invest in diversity, into equity, and to inclusion. And I think these are worthy debates, but not for this campaign. What this campaign is focused on is rectifying the very need for DEI programs on campuses and in institutions and in corporations.
Have you and Bill Ackman talked about DEI and these issues specifically?
He has forwarded materials that he asked me to read, and I get materials from thousands of different people. So the answer is yes. But Other than that, no.
I wanted to come back to the campaign. If we fast forward to November, and it turns out to be the Biden-Trump rematch that
Yeah.
many people are expecting, will you support the president against Donald Trump?
As I've said from the very beginning, data is going to drive every decision. It drove my decision to enter the race. It will ultimately drive my decision to stay in the race, and it could drive my decision to exit the race. It will also drive my decision to identify the best way to prevent Trump from returning to the White House. If it is Joe Biden, short of some miraculous recovery, which I do not anticipate or foresee, I will have to assess what better way I can apply my time and resources and energy other than that. But I have every intention to support the Democratic nominee for president, period.
Congressman Ro Khanna was here, and when he was asked about your campaign, he said that you spend too much time talking about Biden's age and low polling numbers and not enough time offering your own vision for the country. What would you say to that criticism of your run?
Yeah, well, I would say Ro, who's a friend of mine, hasn't looked carefully at what I'm proposing, which I think is a bold plan. Let me start at the very beginning. I talked about restorative justice. I've talked about raising the foundation. I've talked about the need to be a country in which we have equity of opportunity. That starts to me with the very beginning of life. I'm proposing something called American Dream Accounts, the idea of federal government endowing investment accounts for every baby born in this country with $1,000, roughly based on the current birth rate, about $3.5 billion. Those accounts would vest when one turns 18 and if one graduates from high school, a great incentive for every young American to pursue their studies and graduate. Furthermore, I think it is time that we start changing our public school curricula to include financial management training, investment management, and also entrepreneurship. Every young person in this country would have an app on their phone. They could track their investments. All of these accounts would be invested in the U.S. equity markets and U.S. growth companies. They would see their portfolios grow. $500 a year or so could be added to it. And by the time they turn 18, if it compounds at 6%, that is a $20,000 account that would be turned over to young Americans to become owners of this economy, make a down payment on a house, and start a small business, and begin their lives. Starting with that, I believe we also need pre-K education through college education that does not burden people with tens of thousands of dollars in debt. I believe we also need child care, and pre-K can be wrapped around that. I believe economically we need a $15 minimum wage in this country. I also believe we should be pilot testing UBI programs in the lowest income census tracts in this country for two reasons. I think that is a way to ensure better equity, or quality, I should say, of opportunity, but also we are facing an artificial intelligence revolution, a disruption of historic magnitude for which this administration is comprehensively ill-prepared and will be so disruptive it could be 40% of this entire workforce. If we don't start piloting ideas that can prevent what I would consider economic and therefore maybe even civil tragedy, I believe that's important, and that's part of my proposition. Healthcare. I am tired of a country that does not have a system that includes 25 million people with any coverage whatsoever. I'm tired of a system in which Americans pay double any developed country in the world, $12,000 per capita. Tired of a system that has mid-pack outcomes compared to our peers. Tired of a system that allows pharma companies to sell their products in this country for 3-4 times more than anywhere else in the world. Tired of a system that is not healthcare but is sick care. And tired of a system that rewards procedures and not health. I believe it's time for a national health insurance program analogous to public education. A program that covers everybody: physical health, mental and emotional health, eye care, and dental care. If we make upstream investments in human beings, we will save trillions of dollars and lives down the road. Other countries have some models. I think ours would be unique to America, but we need Democrats and Republicans, I believe, to do so. Housing. We need, and by the way, on healthcare, 2/3 of all bankruptcies in the United States of America right now are because of medical debt. I think it's shameful. Housing. 500,000 people sleeping outside in our country every night. Veterans sleeping outside right in the park across the street from us here in Manchester, New Hampshire. It's appalling. We know how to produce in America. We have developers waiting to do so, but we have zoning laws and regulatory environments in municipalities that are preventing the very production we need. It's hard at the federal level to demand that, of course, unless it's preemption, but I think we need an all-hands-on-deck assessment of what is preventing this and get to it. Talked about education, healthcare, and housing. And then towards, when I think about Social Security, of course, you all know we're getting to a point where benefits will have to be cut by 25%, probably as early as 2033. I believe it's time to raise the cap from 160 to about 250, extend the program to the 2040s. And then my capstone is this. There are a lot of successful Americans who do not need their Social Security. They don't want to return it to the Treasury, of course, but I want to create a mechanism by which they could contribute it back to a pool at their own election, and then that would be distributed directly to the lowest 10% of recipients in the country. Nikki Haley wants to have a means test for Social Security. I don't want that. I think Americans should make the choice if they wish to become philanthropists or not. I sat with 2 women in North Conway, New Hampshire just a couple weeks ago. They have to eat cold cereal the last 3 nights of the month because their Social Security benefits don't pay them enough to have a warm meal. I think it's shameful. Imagine what $100 a month could do for these women. Those are just 2 of millions around the country. So when Rose says, I don't have a plan, you know, the fact of the matter is, I went to Joe Biden's website. Have you? Have any of you? I ask you to. See what he's got planned. Nothing. Nothing. So my good friend Roe, I would tell him to go speak to the president and come up with a plan fast.
Congressman, could I jump in on another issue?
Yeah.
We went through financial health, healthcare, education. One of the issues that we've seen rise up in Iowa and New Hampshire compared to last year when a lot of Americans were talking about inflation, we seem to hear the issue of immigration and border security
Sure.
time and time again. How would you fix that problem?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm going to start by telling you I'm a Democrat who agrees with you. There is a massive crisis at our southern border. It's shameful, it's embarrassing, it's unforgivable. I believe every one of us who serve in elected office have a responsibility to see these things with our own eyes. I've done so twice. I've been to the border. It's appalling. It's one of the most embarrassing moments of my life in the United States of America to see human beings in cages, to see the most archaic, poorly designed ports of entry and infrastructure imaginable at a time of such massive crisis. You know, President Biden initiated attacks on the Houthis who have been sending missiles into commercial vessels, of course, in the Red Sea. He did so, and he did it without congressional authority because he has that authority. The President of the United States has the authority to defend this country. And we have thousands of people, almost all of them good people, coming here for the same reasons that my family came here in the 19th century, to achieve a better life and have opportunity and safety. But to resist the responsibility of actually securing our border with thousands coming over, many of whom are not documented and not even have no intervention, I think is a dereliction of duty. And what would I do? I would secure the border. We need a massive transformation of our infrastructure. We need buffer zones on both the Mexican and U.S. sides of the border. We need new technologies, new ports of entry. And we also need to change our asylum law, which to me is the source of the problem. That's the upstream problem. The asylum law right now requires people who wish to migrate to America and use the asylum law to cross the border. That forces them to save $10,000 per person, make the arduous journey, of course, many from the Northern Triangle. They pay that to a Mexican cartel to bring them across the border, enriching them, by the way, which is shameful. They're processed if they are encountered. They're dropped in El Paso without a penny in their pocket, not speaking the language, not able to work, and then entrusted to social service agencies that have little resources, and now being bused to cities that cannot handle the influx. And I do not understand for the life of me why this is not being dealt with. I think we need to change the asylum law so that asylum cases have to be filed in countries of origin. I think we should build dormitories proximate to our consulates and embassies to keep people safe if necessary, adjudicate their cases locally where we actually have people that can understand if it's a valid case. And if they qualify, we should bring them to the United States with their own $10,000 in their pocket to start their new lives here. Not dissimilar from my American Dream accounts. That's how I think we should change the law. The fact that this continues unabated is shameful. And not only that, I think we are months or maybe just years away from migration waves that will make what's happening right now look like nothing. War, famine, lack of clean water, it's on the horizon. And whether it's a Democrat or Republican in place, I think we need someone who recognizes it, acknowledges it, and does something about it. Donald Trump's proposition, the wall, they're going under it, they're going through it, they're going over it. That's not the real problem. The real problem is our law and the comprehensive infrastructure, and I think we can change it, and I know how to.
The border's a live issue right now in
Yep.
Congress, though, and as somebody who, as you described yourself as, who is bipartisan, has worked with Republicans, do you see any prospect for a solution happening now? This is being negotiated as we speak. What are the odds?
Yeah.
What are we looking at?
Sadly, not now. And that's the big problem. I do believe when I'm president that is not just possible, but it is likely and totally achievable. But that's the difference between leadership. President Trump didn't do anything to engage Democrats to come to a thoughtful solution to the problem. President Biden, unfortunately, has done nothing either. And I think that anybody who looks at this problem and realizes that if you don't have people there at the takeoff, you will surely not have them there at the landing. My relationships with my Republican colleagues are very close. I believe there are a number of principled Republicans that we can work together with. Right now, with the margins in the House the way they are, and the way that I think they will be, all it takes is a handful crossing the aisle to get things done. But that takes leadership, it takes relationships, and I think the answer is yes. There's a bill called the Dignity Act that is Rep. Escobar and I can't remember, Rep. From Florida, who have a bipartisan proposition to actually begin to address a lot of these issues. It's getting no attention other than the Problem Solvers Caucus, from which of which I'm a member, and no attention because I don't think leaders right now want to solve the problem.
One of the things we're seeing in our Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll is a weakness with Biden among young voters. And one of the big issues driving that is the war in Gaza. How would you handle that differently? How would you advise President Biden to handle that differently?
Well, let me just acknowledge what you're saying. The apathy is horrifying. The good news is at my events the last few days, and I hope some of you have seen or you're invited to come, is really remarkable and energizing and actually very optimistic. And I've listened to a lot of the young people, and I understand why they're so heartbroken. I'm a Jewish man. You can imagine that my affection for Israel comes from the heart and comes from personal experience and comes from a very horrific history of the Holocaust and even my own family escaping pogroms in the late 19th century to come here. You know, there are 200 or so Christian majority nations in the world, about 140 Muslim majority nations in the world, and only one Jewish majority nation in the world. When the first ship left Europe at the dawn of the Holocaust and of course came to this country, you know what happened, it was turned away. So no one can tell me that there's any country in the world that will accept Jewish refugees no matter what than Israel. It needs to exist, it has a right to exist, and I intend to protect it whether I'm a member of Congress, whether I'm the president, or whether I'm just a civilian here in the United States. I also believe the same is true for Palestinians. They have the right to self-determination. I believe a state should be created and recognized, certainly recognized by the United States of America. This cycle of bloodshed is atrocious. It's appalling. I think what Hamas did on October 7th was one of the most jarring, horrific attacks on human beings I've ever seen in my life. They need to be eliminated. They're also holding 8 Americans hostages, everybody. 8 Americans as of right now, over 3 months. And it is not a headline anymore. The president's barely talking about it. The last time I think so many Americans were held hostage was during the Iranian embassy crisis in 1979. Hamas is a terrorist organization that is directly hurting Americans, let alone killing Israelis. They have to be eliminated. With all that said, I think Benjamin Netanyahu is a big part of the problem. I've been to Jerusalem twice as the ranking member of the subcommittee on the Middle East, Foreign Affairs Committee on the Middle East. I've told him to his face before October 7th about what I consider to be the grave risk facing both Israel and our relationship with them. And I believe his settlement policy, I believe his right-wing government, I believe his judicial reform proposition left Israel vulnerable. The intelligence and military failures are his to own, and I hope Israelis choose new leadership that want peace because it has to change. And you ask about the solution, it has to be 2 states. We have to work with our friends around the world. I think we should work with the Chinese. And I think I can demonstrate a way forward that perhaps others can't. And I intend to do that to the best of my abilities. I also believe that the Saudis are a big linchpin in this. I think MBS has an obligation to fulfill his Vision 2030 plan that requires peace in the region. It requires normalization with the Israelis. And I think it should require the establishment of a Palestinian state in which a multinational consortium ensures its safety, its protection, and a Marshall Plan of sorts that provides something to Palestinians to protect and encourages an economy that might just be the beacon for the rest of the entire Middle East and the Gulf states.
Steve or Elena, you haven't gotten a chance yet. Do either of you have a question?
Sure. Congressman, I mean,
Hi, Elaine.
you're going to be going to South Carolina, as you said.
Yes, I am.
Can you talk a little bit about what investments you're thinking about in terms of TV ad spending or anything to sort of get out your name recognition, be it in South Carolina or any other states down the line?
So we'll be making that. First, I'm going to show up. You know, I think my task right now is to listen. And as I have explored New Hampshire over the last few months, I realize what's really the real disconnect between voters and right now President Biden and candidates is what they perceive as an unwillingness to listen and that they're not being heard. So I intend to go to South Carolina and really just listen. You know, President Biden should win 95% of the votes there. You know, he is very strong in South Carolina. We all know that. So I think my job is to listen to what's on the minds of voters, to weave what I hear into my platform, which might be modified based on what I hear, and we'll make a determination of where our investment should go. You can imagine, I don't have access to the resources that the Biden campaign does. I don't have access to the Democratic National Committee. I don't have access to Democratic donor lists, for gosh sakes. Everything we're doing moving forward is through grassroots contributions. And that's going to mean we are a very scrappy, small, but really energized startup, which is kind of my wheelhouse, by the way. Every success I've had in business, we were the underdog, we were small, we didn't have the capital, we didn't have the people, but darn, we had good ideas.
Well, so
And that's exactly how I intend to run the race.
South Carolina is obviously his base, and
Yeah.
one where you have not spent as much time in. You're not on the ballot in Nevada, which is the next state. After that comes Michigan. So is sort of the next place that you hope to plant a flag and try to build out a campaign, does that start in Michigan for you?
I know everyone looks at this through the lens of a traditional campaign. This is very different, and I think tomorrow night we will be platformed in a way that we have not yet, because I think there's been an initiative to keep us deplatformed. And that'll be my introduction, I think, to a lot of the country, that this is not just a viable campaign, but it could be the campaign that actually saves the country by defeating Donald Trump. And I will go to South Carolina and make these determinations as I have in my business. I look at the data, I look at the evidence, I use my intuition, and we'll make investments based on that. But of course, this is not going to be traditional. I don't want to make you think that we are going to have a massive ground game in all these states and this is going to look like you would expect, because A, this is not an election year that is anything traditional, and this is not a candidate who is anything traditional. And I think it's time to throw tradition out the window and actually go in a different direction, and that's what I intend to do.
Congressman,
Yeah.
you've talked a lot about how the DNC has put their hand on the scale. You've talked about MSNBC, especially not platforming you. Hearing some of those themes, I'm reminded of the 2016 Democratic primary, because that was a lot of the things that Bernie Sanders was saying at the time. I'm curious if you see it that way, if you see any similarities between those two campaigns.
Well, first of all, Bernie Sanders was an independent running in the Democratic primary. I'm a Democrat running in the Democratic primary. That's a difference. There's no question in 2016, I thought, based on my perch, I thought Bernie Sanders was just a sore loser. I didn't pay much attention to it. And there's no question, what I've discovered makes what he said the truth. And I understand how this party operates, and it is nefarious, and I think it is dangerous, and I think it is a hypocrisy of democracy. And I want to make that really clear. I'm not here to be a whiner or a complainer. I'm going to do it very differently. But the truth is this: MSNBC has not extended a single invitation since I declared my candidacy. Now, if it's not for political reasons, at least I'm the ranking member of the Middle East Subcommittee. I'm surprised that there would not be a single invitation, so I think there's something there, neither here nor there. CNN has done a 1-hour primetime town hall for every single one of the GOP candidates, most of whom are no longer in the race. Most of whom are no longer in the race. That's Ron DeSantis, that's Mike Pence, that's Chris Christie, that's Ramaswamy, that is Haley, and Trump himself. So I think 6 town halls. I've called Mark Preston at CNN 2 times, not even gotten a phone call back. So something, of course, is going on. I'm not here to talk about it or throw stones, but I'm going to tell you the truth. And I think that's part of this entire political industrial complex that does, as you, in your words, puts the hand on the scale. And that's why we got to be scrappy and do this differently. And we will. I'm using new media, I'm using new platforms, a lot of podcasts, a lot of social media to introduce myself. Because, yeah, it's complicated if you're not the coronated candidate to find airtime.
And to follow up really quick, you said that what Bernie Sanders said was the truth.
Well,
and
that's just, by the way, that's just media. Now let me talk about the real public truth, which is, let's start with Florida. The Democratic Party of Florida, of course, as you know, called an emergency last-minute meeting on October, I think, 29th, just 2 days after my candidacy was declared, so they could quickly place one name on the ballot, and that's Joe Biden. They essentially decided the primary has already been conducted, Joe Biden won, and all the delegates from Florida will be allocated to him, literally denying 4 million Democratic voters in Florida the chance to even vote. North Carolina, same thing. If you look at their law, it says very simply, if you are a candidate for president who is referenced in the national news or the North Carolina news, you shall be on the ballot. Look at how many people were on the ballot last time. By the way, Florida and North Carolina, same thing, one name. They tried in Massachusetts. Thankfully, the Secretary of State intervened, and I'm on the ballot. It has cost my campaign about $2 million to simply access the ballot as a Democrat, as a member of Congress, running for president. I think it's shameful. And then lastly, New Hampshire, where we are right now. And I think you all know what has happened, but Joe Biden, the leader of the Democratic Party with the Democratic National Committee, decided to change this 103-year practice of democracy as the first in the nation primary. They used reasons that, of course, South Carolina is a more diverse state, and I respect that. But I think even Jim Clyburn, and I ask that you look up his quote, Jim Clyburn himself said this state would be an embarrassment for him. So they moved it, and then when New Hampshire could not go along with it because there's a Republican in the state house here, they literally disenfranchised every single Democratic voter in the state by saying this is a non-sanctioned primary, the president's name won't be on the ballot at his own discretion, and the delegates won't be seated at the National Convention. I don't know if there's a time, well, there probably have been times where this has happened before, but it was so egregious, of course, that the New Hampshire Secretary of State just had to send a letter to the Democratic National Committee, cease and desist for the unlawful suppression of voters. So if you ask me what's going on, the evidence is on paper, the letter from the DNC calling this meaningless, and the letter back saying stop the unlawful suppression of our voters in the state of New Hampshire. That is from the Democratic Party of this country that I represent, so I'm not going to be quiet. The same way my Republican friends were quiet when they saw the tragedy of the Trump administration, got in front of cameras, and told something totally different. I'm going to tell you the truth. That's what's going on. And people can either ignore it or be silent about it, like every single one of my colleagues, including Ro Khanna, or someone can call attention at least to what's happening and talk about it. That's what I'm doing.
You were predicting earlier that you think Biden will likely underperform tomorrow night. What number are you looking at that would show that he's underperforming?
Well, there are all kinds of various lenses on this, but of course, we'll start with Bill Clinton at 84% here for his reelect. Barack Obama about 81%. The best analogy perhaps is 1968, when you had a weak incumbent president in Lyndon Johnson, challenged by another lightly known Minnesotan by the name of Gene McCarthy. Gene McCarthy didn't win, but he shocked the country, and so did Johnson's underperformance. So you can look at the number. I think the baseline is 80%. That's what a strong incumbent should win. This is not a very big, there are not a lot of people in this race, and I think the incumbent president, who is known to every single voter in the state, should achieve 80% if he's strong. I don't think he will be. I think we'll be stronger than most suspect, and what happens thereafter will be up to the president more than anybody.
Folks, I think we have time for one more question based on the Congressman's availability.
A question about historical context.
Yeah.
You just raised Eugene McCarthy in 1968. In 1980, there was a primary challenge against a president who was perceived to be a weak incumbent. Both those men were not president afterwards. So what gives you confidence that you would be different this time around?
Well, Jimmy Carter was not going to win that election, and that's where this context is so important. Political consultants like to use the example of that as an example of what happens if someone challenges an incumbent, period. My contention is an incumbent does not get challenged unless he or she is awfully weak, because why would somebody in a position like me do that? It's foolhardy, personally, for my party and for my country. So I don't believe it was Kennedy that cost Jimmy Carter that election. I actually celebrate people who compete. This is not the first time, nor it will be the last time. That's why we have primaries. If not, we could simply have a law, or have the parties could very easily, at their own behest, simply say, if there's an incumbent, there shall be no primary. So either do one of the two. Either have the primary, encourage competition, which is always healthy, or just be honest. There shall be no primary if there's an incumbent. You can't have it both ways. Right now in this state, they're trying to have it both ways. A big write-in campaign. They've got a super PAC. They've got one group actually trying to get right or left-leaning Democrats or independents to vote for Haley. There's a massive, all the cabinet members and members of Congress are coming up here, the governor of Massachusetts, the mayor of Boston. You understand what's going on. But this notion that one shall not compete in a primary when there's an incumbent, I think is one of the most dangerous affronts, egregious affronts to democracy imaginable, a construct of a political industrial complex that wants us to believe that to protect their tradition of disenfranchisement.
Well, Congressman, thank you so much for your time today, and thank
Thank
you
you.
all for coming. I think you are also gracing us with a Bloomberg Television interview following up here. So thank you so much to you and to everyone. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Peggy. Thanks, everybody.